Welcome to the Eddie Lamb Show. We dedicate this podcast to interviewing musicians of every kind, as well as online content creators on social media. Whether if they're starting out or if they're already on the rise and still growing, this show is all about having a fun conversation with our guests, talking about their favorite things that relate to their passion for their projects. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's have that conversation. We're so used to praising the sounds of such string instruments as the violin, the cello, and much more. However, probably one of the most underrated instruments is the viola, and it truly deserves a lot more recognition. Vancouver-based strings player Thomas Beckman is a master of this specific instrument. He's one of the most talented performers and composers who helps music fans appreciate the unique sound the viola brings to the table. We'll be talking about his history of busking with his bandmates, composing, and his love for Hollywood soundtracks. Hello, everybody. So in the studio, we have a local strings player who is living right here in Vancouver, Canada. Of course, you may have seen him play at such places as Granville Street back in the early 2010s, but you may have seen him play some great big stages, and you may have also seen him on the good old interwebs, which includes YouTube, Instagram, other social media platforms, whatever it may be. You've seen this guy play the viola like a boss that he is. So without further ado, we're going to dig deep into his musical abilities, his interests, his history, all that good stuff. His name is Mr. Thomas Beckman. Thomas, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Ed. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So let's talk about all these current things you're doing right now. So
yeah, sure. On
YouTube, you are playing all these different theme songs from movie soundtracks that we knew back from the 80s to present time. You've even done TV show themes like The Mandalorian from Disney Plus.
Yeah.
What inspired you to get into the soundtrack field?
Well, I think the two great loves in my life come from viola and film music. And so when I was a kid, I grew up on the staple Hollywood stuff that we all grew up on, the George Lucas and the Spielberg films. And of course, John Williams was the big force there. But then I, of course, watched many other films, and I was always very interested in the film music, and I'd often watch the credits. Back in the old days of VHS, I would watch the credits so I could hear the soundtrack. And I collected soundtracks throughout my teenage years. So I've always loved film music. I feel it has a real energy to it. I love, of course, classical music, but there's something about film music for me that has more of it's narrative. It's narrative based, and it tells a story, and it's just got a real palpable sense of drama and energy, and so that's always just fascinated me. So when I thought about doing this project, I thought, well, instead of doing pop tunes, 'cause I'm not really into pop music per se, but there's so many great melodic themes that have come from the canon of film music. I thought, well, that's what I'll tuck into, and that way I'm combining the instrument that I play on with the type of music that I listen to and love the most.
When you first watched movies and you noticed a soundtrack that just grabbed your attention, what was that one movie that did that?
Well, I loved, this is going back a long ways, but The Seahawk by Korngold. Eric von Korngold, who is a great, I think he was, what was he now? I can't remember exactly which country he's from. He's a European composer, and he moved to the States, and he got assigned to do all of this great film music.
That's right, yeah.
All the Errol Flynn's swashbuckling films. So, but I remember the Seahawk score, and I must have been 4 or 5 years old. And it just, the guy was just, from an orchestration standpoint, he was just a complete genius. His music had all the richness of Richard Strauss and Wagner, and then he did, had his own signature, and just incredibly rich music, and harmonically so so interesting and moves around a lot. It's restless, chromatic music. So though that really took me by storm. And then watching A New Hope, Star Wars. I remember every morning I'd get up. My sister would watch either Cinderella or The Little Mermaid, and I'd wait my turn, and then I'd watch A New Hope because that's what we had. And I remember the music during the dialogue scene between Obi-Wan and Luke when Obi-Wan's explaining the history of Anakin.
That's right.
And it just was so mysterious and scintillating, and I just remember how that it propelled what could have otherwise been a fairly ordinary scene into something quite magical. And so that's when I think I was starting to really notice the music and how much of a role it played.
That's amazing how you notice the background music during that scene, because this was pretty much the explanation to what led up to episode 4, basically.
I know. I mean, I feel like that scene alone was what sort of kindled our fascination with the upcoming prequels in the 90s, because that was the lore and the myth behind everything.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. It's just so funny how now both what your sister grew up watching and what you enjoyed in terms of Star Wars, now they're owned by Disney on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
So who knew?
I know. It seems so bizarre that a movie that's all. I mean, the Star Wars are actually quite childish in many places, but I suppose to us they were sort of these adult adventure films, but really. Yeah. Not so much.
Yeah, exactly. So, what about the other Star Wars movies from besides the original trilogy? Now, has there been any other parts of that soundtrack that stood out to you? Like maybe, let's say, Phantom Menace, or maybe even from the later sequels?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's so many great cues. People, when they refer to the Star Wars music, I feel most people are aware, of course, of the main themes. But there's so many intermittent, what we call cues, which most people aren't aware of. They don't get played in concerts. It's not what people listen to on the, whatever you might listen to nowadays. But I like to dissect the whole. Well, I don't just dissect the whole score, but I like to listen to all the other cues. And I really feel like the brilliance of the composer comes out the most there. The big fanfare themes get overplayed. We've all heard them too many times.
Of course,
The opening crawl music, do we have to hear that again? Yeah. But if you listen to the other cues, whether it's the Battle of Yavin, or I always love the cue where Luke has suddenly realized that his aunt and uncle are in huge danger and he has to rush back to them on the land speeder.
That's right.
And the cellos have this amazing opening that's... And just lots of moments like that throughout the whole canon of Star Wars music that... really gripped me.
It seems like at that time, John Williams was way ahead of the game when it comes to trying to compose something that's so, it adds the advancement to the storyline.
Yeah, I recently read a book on him. I can't remember the name of the author, but he was, one of the issues he tackled was the fact that a lot of people have criticized John Williams for being a bit of a classical hack. I mean, if you listen actually to the very, it's interesting. You can play the last 10 to 20 seconds of Mars by Gustav Holst. And if you listen to the same sort of music for the opening scene where the Star Cruiser flies overhead, they're the exact same chords. And there's sort of all these big shots of chords to sort of, really imparts a sense of grandeur. But what he does, and this is something the author was talking about, what he does so expertly is he takes this rich body of classical music and he really transforms it and it becomes his own thing. And if you listen to John Williams, his style his signature is instantly recognizable. So he never sounds like someone else, even though he so heavily does allow himself to be influenced.
That's right.
It never reaches a point where it now just sounds like he's just quoting somebody else. Might be the odd isolated moment where he does that, but within the whole picture.
Yeah.
If you listen to beyond that just 10 seconds, the way he integrates all of these great iconic composers into his own tapestry of music it transforms and it becomes his own language.
That's right.
And I think that's the test for any great composer.
Yeah.
Is that they have an identifiable signature that is completely their own. And so that's why I think he and a lot of people have recognized him as being one of the great composers of the 20th and 21st century, not just a film composer for Hollywood.
Yeah, that's right. Because that's the thing too. Because it's like every movie that you hear him composed in, from Superman to Schindler's List to Jurassic Park, that's the theme to that said movie, and it stays in your head forever. Sure. If you're fans of that too, right? Because I remember when I first heard the theme to Jurassic Park, for example, right? I'm just like, wow, this is just an amazing theme. You don't even have to think about the dinosaurs. You just appreciate the fact that this is more than just dinosaurs. This is about like the epicness. It's like admiring the wonders of things larger than life, basically. And besides dinosaurs being large,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, and I feel like the music itself is so strong too. It's so original and strong. And there have been many composers who, sometimes I feel like if you take a composer like Hans Zimmer, I was watching Gladiator the other day,
right?
And I just found the music so incredibly derivative. And yes, it was big and it was grand, but it didn't have the same, I don't know, artistic depth, or I'm not sure what the right word would be. But when you listen to that Jurassic Park theme, it is so majestic and so harmonically beautiful.
That's
and
right.
Notice he never overuses the choir too.
That's right.
So there's a subtlety with the way he writes, where a lot of other composers, they just go lock, stock, and barrel, but it loses that subtlety. It doesn't quite have the same musical intelligence, or I don't know. Yeah.
That's true. That's very true. And in fact, you're actually the third guest to actually talk about Hans Zimmer.
Oh,
in this podcast. Yeah, no, you have been. So
nice.
Yeah. So you're person number 3 to talk about Zimmer.
Yeah.
It's interesting too how you mentioned him as well, because he is coming to town later this year of 2024.
Yeah.
Bring his whole orchestra with him, and it's just so interesting how you don't often hear too much about a composer for film bringing their orchestra with them to tour across the globe.
Sure.
And I feel like, this is something that you don't hear too often, but, I think for all these big diehard fans who love his work, they're going to be wearing their favorite movie merch on a t-shirt, probably, something like that. But would that be something you would ever consider doing if someone, maybe not Hans Zimmer, but let's say any kind of famous composer or conductor wanted to hire you to be part of that touring orchestra, would you do that?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, if the opportunity came along, it sounds like one hell of a ride.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it says a lot about the music of Hans Zimmer, how he's able to mobilize that music into a performance, to the extent that he does. I think his music does, from a sound point of view, it's very versatile and just lots of variation and different sounds. And the way I remember in an interview he was saying how he likes to cast musicians the way you'd cast an actor. And I thought that was such an interesting thing. So I think Hans Zimmer is very collaborative as far as I can sense.
Yeah.
Whereas John Williams is more of the classic composer who disappears into a room and writes. Whereas Hans Zimmer is constantly working with a whole team of people. He doesn't just sit down and write it all himself.
Right.
Like for Dune, for instance, which he won the Academy Award for.
That's right, yeah.
That guy who plays those interesting flutes, I'm not sure what they're called, but they produce all of these sort of Middle Eastern sounding woodwind instruments.
That's right, yeah.
I mean, I don't think he really told him what to play note for note. I think he said, this is kind of what I'm going for, and come up with your own stuff.
And go.
Yeah. And I think he's also been involved in helping to design brand new instruments as well.
That's right, yeah.
So
I'm not surprised that he would do something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a different process.
That's amazing. Speaking of instruments, let's go back to your love for playing the viola. So the first time we met, we knew each other from the local music scene. I saw you and with the first version of the band Sons of Granville. Right, the first version of it, and you guys were playing on Granville Street, but it was for a showcase put together by our friend back then, Mr. Mark Stokes, I believe.
Oh,
right,
Mark, yeah,
yeah, and you guys were playing on that stage out there in Granville Street, and I'm just like, this is interesting, an instrumental duo at the time. Right?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
and so. Let's go back in time about that. So, what was the most memorable thing that you personally enjoyed when you were busking on Granville Street in the early 2010s?
well, I mean, it felt like a bit of a spiritual exercise. Firstly, coming to grips with the idea of busking. I really sucked back then.
I find it hard to believe.
No, I did. I really did, and that's fair. I mean, we all have to cut our teeth, and we have to go through that grueling process to get somewhere. But I remember it presented itself like a spiritual exercise because you have to play on the side of the street, and I mean, not that I really cared, but you're getting ignored, but you're warming up, and you're trying to play in tune, and you're playing with this crazy guitarist, and you're trying to sort of improvise together to make something work. I mean, it's not like we never, with Matt and I, we never sort of went into like a study and said, okay, let's write a song. Let's sit down and come up with some chords. It was always like, I'm just going to play this and you play whatever you want to play.
Right.
And then organically through hours of improvising, we just arrived at a collection of tunes, which then got on our CD. And that's really informed the way I've approached music since then, because it's very organic, and it's also very slow,
right?
But it leads to some genuine results,
right?
Which are not sort of forced. It's a nice sort of evolution that takes place where you just have a bunch of crap, and you just over time it gets shaped and molded, and then you both have these aha moments where you lock in with synchronicity, and you end up doing something, and it's so good that you remember it, that every time you come to the same juncture you do the same thing again.
That's right.
So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the definitive moments, which is not nearly as spiritually impressive, but was just when I suddenly Matt and I counted our coins, and we'd realized we'd made $400. And I was suddenly it dawned on me that, hey, I could actually make a living doing this, at least for the next little while, which meant that I could actually make a living from playing my instrument. Because up until then, I'd had job as a waiter or working in a deli store or something,
Really? I had no idea.
Well, yeah, whilst I was at university, and afterwards, I think I had some little jobs to help. But it didn't take long for us to then say, well, let's make a living from busking. And so that's why we were out there all the time, because it was our rent, it was our groceries, it was, and
it paid for almost everything basically.
Yeah, it did. After a very short time, until I got injured in 2014, it was my staple income.
Ouch.
Yeah. So that was great. It was so validating. And I often had the sensation that I'd close my eyes and play, and we get deep into it, and then I'd open my eyes, and suddenly there was a crowd. Yeah. And suddenly there was like bills and coins littered all over the case. And if I had this distinctive feeling like by drawing deep into my soul and playing, that somehow I was manifesting all of this attention and a bit of wealth. And so that was really one of the really transformative aspects of busking.
It's so fascinating when I first met you too, because I was just like, never have I pictured someone classically trained to do something like busking too, because I always thought, because usually for me, like I remember my experience growing up, when I think about busking, I always just think a guy with a guitar doing some classic rock music or folk music, and that was it. Or maybe the occasional saxophone player that I would see once in a while, right?
And there was a little bit of a stigma too to busking, let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that every busker has to kind of negotiate within themselves. is to get rid of that stigma.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
oh, you're playing on the street for cents and for small change. It's when you get into it, you realize it can be so much more than that.
Yeah, and I think at the same time too, because even after I did some busking on my end personally too, before I started to appreciate all these musicians, including you guys, of how much effort went into it behind the scenes. And I was just like, man, like this is what you guys had to deal with every day, especially during those really tough moments, right? Where you get some you get some people who are like might be a little bit a little bit interesting, right?
Oh, colorful characters that we'd be encountering on the streets.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the biggest challenge were ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, it was Matt and I. We had a sort of a love-hate relationship where we're, it's just two creatives clashing.
Right.
Every second piece or whatever, we were constantly, I'd have my ideas and he'd have his ideas. And so it was a constant battle to try and find that middle ground or to compromise. And when you're very passionate and you're into it, the last thing you want to do is compromise. So there was a lot of that. But we had some unbelievable instances of camaraderie. And once Jarrett came into the mix, he really helped to mediate a lot more, and sort of the dynamic got a bit more of a space. There was more chance to breathe because it wasn't just two people knocking their heads together all the time.
That's right.
So I think 3 is quite a magical number.
Yeah, having a trio. I mean, that's the thing, because you guys grew into a power trio ever since Jarrett came into the picture.
Oh, he was huge for us.
Yeah,
and he is huge for us.
Yeah. I guess for the record, I know Jarrett mentioned it from the that mini documentary that you guys did, which is on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Still. Right.
Oh my gosh.
I watch it from time to time.
So
I'll be honest with you.
embarrassing.
I'll watch it from time to time, right? Because it's just so fascinating. Because it just makes it just shines a really good light on the local scene somehow. And sometimes I want to show my out of town friends, hey, look, this is what happens right here in our backyard. Right. But and what Jarrett said was true, like I not to toot my own horn or anything, but we were just talking about our local friends, right, at the time when I was still playing with Jarrett in other projects. And Jarrett was looking for other people to jam with, and I said to him, you know what, you should check out Sons of Granville. I bet you would be a good fit with these guys. And Jarrett was like, yeah. I think he said something like, I think I've heard of those guys. I asked him around.
Well, we're very grateful to you for that. I remember actually the first time I had a conversation with Jarrett, he thought I was Matt.
Really?
I think he thought I was Matt, and then he was like, he thought I was German because I think he heard my accent, which is kind of South African, and he thought, mate, well, that's. So at the end of it, there was a awkward moment of realization, but Jarrett is gold. He's got such a great sense of humor. I mean, it's so funny when we meet together for gigs, because normally what we do with Sons of Granville is we have to meet 3 or 4 hours or some 3 or 2 hours before a gig to set up.
Right.
Because we got quite a big setup. It's not easy trying to have a nice big sound for our particular instrumentation. Viola, cajon, and acoustic guitar can be a nightmare if you're trying to create a big sound out of that. Because we're not playing electric instruments, all acoustic. So it's a real feedback nightmare. And Justin has done such a fantastic job in creating a sound for us that we now use wherever we go.
Yeah.
But in any case, so we spent a lot of time together after the setup till the time that we actually have to perform. And it's so funny being with Jarrett because he'll sometimes launch into a 20-30 minute monologue on the details of a PA's life in film. And he takes what theoretically should be the most boring subject on earth, and he finds a way just to kind of make it funny. And Justin and I are just shaking our heads. And
I know. And the funny thing is that this is where it kind of comes in full circle a little bit for both you and Jarrett. Even for you, you're talking about your influence in movies, and Jarrett is also involved in film as well as his other job too. It's kind of funny how that kind of comes together somehow. And Vancouver is considered Hollywood North.
That's right. It is. Yeah.
Yeah. So now fast forward. So the current lineup is you, Jared, and Justin, and Sons of Granville.
That's right.
And so now you guys are at that point in your life where you've, as we say in video game term, you've leveled up, level up your skills over the years, right? Over the last oh man, I want to say 14 years since I've known you. Holy crap, man. We've known each other for that long.
14 years.
Yeah. So all the 14 years since I've known you. And your skills have grown over the years. Like I always knew that you guys were solid, but you guys have gone, at least, even for you as a viola player, you've gotten way more solid as it just kept elevating each time I see you. Mm-hmm. So now you're doing corporate events, private parties, including weddings and other special occasions, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So what do you enjoy most about that experience of doing those kind of gigs?
Well, I've got a couple of special clients, like actually tomorrow and on Sunday, I'm playing at the Artists for Conservation Festival. They have a festival every year.
That's right.
And so that's a whole legion of naturalists and wildlife specialists, and who are these are the people who are in that world, but they're also painters and sculptors and graphic artists, and so they put together a whole catalog. So it's really nice to be a part of that event because it's for such a great cause. They put up an exhibition, and then for every painting that's sold, there's a percentage of that's dedicated to a conservation agency of the buyer's choice, or the artist's choice.
Right.
So that's a great gig. And then for the weddings, that I always love to play. That's just a job.
Yeah.
What I'm really excited about though is the collaboration right now that's going on with the H.R. Macmillan Space Center.
Yes.
Yeah. So this year on May the 4th, they have their annual Star Wars show. But they invited me to come in. So Kitty Lamb, who's a pianist that I work with, she has the same surname as you.
Oh, I know. Yes.
Yeah. So we did an old Star Wars program. And so that was great. And it went down very well. They sold it out and they want us to come back. So I'm working on sort of a big show right now, a whole bunch of film arrangements.
Yeah.
And the idea is to take those backing tracks, which I arrange, and with Sam Ryan, we'll produce them, and then we'll use them as backing tracks to be played in a live performance. And Jared's actually going to join me on drums. So,
right on.
Yeah, so one of the pieces for that show will be a big Star Wars medley.
Wow, that's going to be great.
So that should be fun. And John Williams might roll his eyes if he heard it, because I've kind of done my own thing with it, but I've taken all of his themes and I've welded them together.
Nice. And just the fact that you can do something like that at the planetarium, for example,
right?
You know, it like, if anyone who is visiting Vancouver, by the way, if you're just visiting, you're just in town for the weekend, whatever it may be, I would recommend you guys to come visit the planetarium. Or not, we're not sponsored by the planetarium right now.
It is a great planetarium.
It is a great planetarium. Yeah. So, but yeah, this is not a sponsored message, just so you guys know, FYI. But we're just saying this as Vancouverites here, that you know, it is a great center to visit. So if you love the planetarium kind of stuff, then that's where you want to be. But even with what you do too, like, I feel like this is just an idea to give you. Like, let's say if you rented like a nice stage somewhere, you know, with a nice hall and everything, I could picture you just playing a soundtrack to whatever movie, TV show, video game, whatever it may be, and you can have the screen playing of that clip in the background.
Oh yeah. Well, the planetarium is actually producing a visual accompaniment for the shows next year. So there'll be moving planets and whirling stars and all of that stuff.
That's right.
And we were able to get into that because I have a pretty good relationship with them. And Michael Unger, who's he's the education coordinator there, and he does a lot of the lectures for a lot of these shows.
That's right.
They gave me access to shoot 4 of my short videos, which was part of this whole Viola film music series.
Right.
So I did 4 music videos in the planetarium.
Right.
And so for The Mandalorian, as you pointed out, we got a landscape of Mars because I think it was the closest thing that we could find to the main planet.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, sort of like Tatooine-esque. And then we also did Star Trek with moving stars. We found some sort of eerie green haze, which we used for the Alien cover video. And what was the other one we did? Anyway, so there were four of them. I can't remember we did Hans Zimmer's Stay from Interstellar.
Okay, yes.
And that's probably my favorite score by Hans Zimmer, and it's played quite often in concerts.
Yeah.
So, so
that's amazing. And, it's just so cool, the fact that you can take your spin on these soundtracks to a different level, basically, or just a different direction of it sound-wise, too. It's like, because we're always so used to hearing these soundtracks backed by the orchestra, right? But I like how you've took it to a different direction where you have way less instruments, but you still make it sound so powerful. And this is just your own spin on it, but it still has that same impact as the original recordings would.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's just way less instruments, but you still make it sound very impactful in a way.
Yeah, and one of the big things with the series is to kind of showcase the instrument itself, the viola. As one thing I was talking about on CBC Radio when I had my interview with them a couple of months back.
That's right.
In the commercial world of music, there are stars for violin and cello, but there's just no one rocking out on viola. Mm-hmm. So we've got David Garrett, and we've got Hauser, and Lindsey Sterling, and others who have really taken the violin and the cello, and they've taken it to the highest levels. But as I've just said, there's just no one doing that on viola. So there's plenty of viola classical stars, but just no one in popular music. So this, I'm hoping, will address a bit of a gap, and I'm hoping it will kind of encourage some other viola players more talented than I to think about that, because it's such a beautiful sounding instrument. It's got a beautiful mid-range, rich, lush sound. And I just think it would be, I think audiences, if they had a chance to experience a Hauser but on cello, I think people would be riveted. So,
and speaking of other strings players, so let's say if you got a chance to collaborate with any other famous strings player, is there any, say, top 2 or top 3 that come to mind?
Well, to be honest, I feel kind of intimidated at the thought of it. I've never collaborated with anyone on a sort of a, stratospheric level.
Or as we call it, the final boss level.
The final boss level, yeah, exactly. I feel like a newbie at WoW. It's hard to, I'd have to, maybe Zoe Keating, who's done some really wonderful things with the loop pedal and the cello.
That's right. Yeah.
I actually watched her play a couple of years ago at the Neptune Theater, if I'm getting it correct, in Seattle.
Right.
And she's got a gorgeous sound, and I feel like I would love to just improvise.
Yeah.
With her. I feel like that would be, if she set up a really nice loop.
Yeah.
We could just go back and forth at it.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think that's a good choice too, but because with you've done looping yourself too. I remember that one gig you, Isaac, and I did in Westminster outdoors. I remember when you did that, I was just like, wow, I totally forgot that you know how to use the pedal already. And it was just like, that just pretty much advanced your sound way more. And I think that was really awesome. It's like you've created all these different, just multiple layers of yourself, basically. It's like you're your own chamber. Yeah.
Well, I think I use a band. It's called the band that wraps around the instrument, and it negates feedback, and it gets a really rich sound. The problem with the band is that you can't play too heavy because the signal tends to blow up.
That's right. Yeah.
But one of the nice things about the band, as far as looping is concerned, is that you can tap the band and it becomes kind of like a percussive instrument, but it's got quite a rich bass. So depending on the velocity of your taps, you can create some really cool beats. So I found that when I was looping with the RC300, that I could use the band as a very sort of a cool percussive instrument. and then I could tap the bow col legno style.
Yeah.
And that also sounds really wicked. For any string players out there who are using the loop pedal, try the col legno taps. They're such a great complement to any kind of a bassy percussion you might be generating.
Really? Oh, nice. That's amazing. So you have seen the concert at Seattle, right? Do you find that there is a difference of response, audience response to artists playing versus here in Western Canada? Because I know just from my personal experience, like when I went to see like a rock concert, for example, like it was a little bit more wild down in Seattle. Last time I went to a concert down there, and not gonna lie, it was, it was quite a big ball of energy.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. I mean, I've every year I probably go watch the VSO, 8 to a dozen times, and I find that no matter how the concert goes, everybody always stands up and claps. And maybe the snob in me is just like, well, I mean, not every performance is as good as the last one, So there's kind of I'm going to sound very arrogant here, but there's kind of like a naive, I don't know, just kind of easily impressed vibe that I sense with the classical crowd.
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like other crowds in other parts of the world might be a bit more reserved, and they might be a bit more analytical about the performance.
Right.
Whereas here, anything anybody does in the classical sphere is just immediately standing ovation.
Wow.
And they clap in between movements too. So,
yes.
So I'm just like, okay.
I remember this one VSO concert I went to a long time ago as a teenager. I got tickets to the show because my previous one of my previous music teachers got me tickets to it, right? I think that's what happened. So regardless, so I remember like there was they were going between movements, right? And after they finished the second movement, there's a little bit of a like 2-3 second pause, right? And then they go on to the next movement. And of course, usually most people who know that piece would know this is okay. Going to the third movement, right? Yeah. Even it says it in the brochure as well, right? So, and during that pause, there's just this one senior gentleman. He goes, "Wow," and then everyone just laughed. And I don't think this guy know what's going on.
He'd probably get himself thrown out if he was in Berlin or something.
I think he would get in so much trouble out in Berlin.
It's also funny how when I watch a lot of these concerts through YouTube, and a lot of the European audiences will cough and hack during the movements. In between movements, because they don't want to cough or make any kind of a noise during the movement.
Wow.
So which is kind of interesting. Whereas people here will just, if they'll clear their throat or they will cough, there's no real pressure or sense of duty to keep as quiet as possible during the movement, which is also kind of interesting.
It's interesting too that you mentioned that, because I would have thought people just commonly, they either sneeze or cough, whatever during the song, because that's when no one can hear you.
Right. Yeah. Oh, if you watch London Symphony or the Berlin Philharmonic or the Vienna Phil Player or any of those European orchestras, you'll notice that the audiences they'll clear their throats and cough whatever they were, building up during the movement. They'll do that in between the movements.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, actually.
Yeah. So what about in terms of learning about all these different composers? I'm assuming you must have did formal study on music history, right? Learning about all these people like Brahms, Handel, Mozart, Beethoven, whoever, Franz Liszt, and it goes on and on.
We all studied music history doing the BMUS degree.
Yeah.
And I was a student at University of Cape Town, the South African College of Music, from 2003 till 2006.
Yeah.
And so during that 4-year degree, we studied music history. And I loved it. I've always loved history. I loved both general history and music history at high school, and I enjoyed music history at university.
Right on. Would you ever narrate a music documentary if you had the chance?
Oh, possible. I think what I'd like to do is actually study general history. I'm busy taking a course right now, actually, in medieval history.
No kidding.
Yeah. So I think once my hands succumb to arthritis and old age, I'd like to transition to teaching history in some sort of capacity.
Oh, Dr. Beckman. Yeah. That'd be great. So with you learning medieval history right now, is there anything that you want to share that stands out to you during your classes?
Well, I was enjoying the maps that you got in the school here.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, it's like we often have very sort of westernized views of history that we get through the movies. Everything is sort of portrayed as good guys and villains, but when you go into history, it's a much more complicated political game. And in that sense, I feel like Game of Thrones is from a social political point of view, it's actually a much more accurate representation of what tends to happen with all of the conniving and the strategizing and the plotting.
Right.
So I feel like, history in that sense it's very dramatic, and you can't trust anyone.
Yeah.
It's just constantly people being stabbed in the back, and yeah.
Well, I remember when I first studied music history for a couple of years too, right? As it was required as part of my theory curriculum from the Royal Conservatoire of Music, right? I remember when I was studying the life of these composers, like what they all had in common. I was just like, man, these guys did not have a good life at all. It was hard for these guys.
Yeah,
it was difficult, and I couldn't help but feel sorry for them in a way. And even like when I went to these concerts at the Orpheum Theater, I looked at brochures. They were so thoughtful, informative about putting not just the name of the composer, but even to show what year they were born and what year they passed away. I was looking at that. I'm just like,
yeah, most of them didn't live long, hey?
No, they didn't. Some of them they only just made it to 32, and I'm just like, man, like, ouch, man. That's kind of painful.
A lot of them were just totally insane.
Yeah.
As well. Who's that? Berlioz, that French composer.
Yeah.
He was a crazy guy. He wrote some phenomenal music. Actually, he wrote a great piece called Harold in Italy for the viola, which he wrote for Paganini, the legendary violinist who supposedly sold his soul to the devil for his impossible technique.
It's like that early part of that, what we learn about in the mainstream culture of today's music industry.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that Paganini refused to play the piece because he thought it was too easy.
Oh, yeah.
But there was another crazy story where Berlioz fell in love with some woman, and he wrote this piece for her, and he just spent everything he had in getting the orchestra together and producing the whole piece. And then she apparently didn't like it and sort of just kind of walked out kind of thing. And it's just, but just taking that much of a risk, on some sort of feeling, some infatuation, they were crazy things.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole love triangle with Brahms and Schumann, Clara Schumann and Robert Schumann.
That's right, yeah.
And I heard that Robert Schumann, who was a brilliant pianist as well as a composer, actually destroyed the finger, and I think it was
it was paralyzed, wasn't it?
Yeah, he developed some contraption that he was trying to develop dexterity in a finger to try and separate the finger joints between two fingers that are attached by one joint.
That's right.
And in the process, he shredded his joint.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. And that was the thing, because when I read about his his injury and everything like that, and he was trying to make it work, I'm like, as despite the consequences he paid for that price, you have to give him credit that at least he was thinking way outside the box to try to make things work for him.
That's true. Yeah.
And this is where like it goes back to what you were saying. Like, these guys are just completely insane to the brain because of all these, they're like the mad scientists during that time, right? It's like they're coming up with all these different ideas for their music. If not, they're doing something for their personal life that still circles back to their music somehow.
Yeah. I think one of the other reasons why we tend to venerate and play their music over and over again is because nowadays the way we make music is heavily technology reliant. And so anybody who knows how to work a computer with a software writing program that's got playback, can produce an awful lot of music with far less effort, and then he can hear it back, or she can hear it back. Whereas back in, centuries ago, you just had to be able to play that yourself on a piano.
Yeah.
And you couldn't just, play. You had to play it multiple times. So you had to really know what you would do. You had to have a very thorough musicianship, aside from just stacking notes and then, cutting them and shaping them to fit whatever you want to, what you're trying to make. And so I think that level of musicianship really proliferates what they're doing, and it adds to the overall knowledge of the orchestra and how music works. And I think that's why there's such an incredible melodic and harmonic and textural quality to what they've produced, because they've had to imbibe that musically themselves. They can't just have a computer do all the work for them.
No, exactly. Yeah. So with you studying history, both medieval history and also, of course, previously music history, what is one of the things that you've learned to appreciate just in general? Anything that comes to mind?
For me, one of the central motivation for studying history, my hope is to move past medieval history. I was never actually that interested in medieval history per se. But it's just, as human beings, we all have these deep motivations to do things. And I sometimes think it's slightly erroneous to try and understand why that is. Like, one of the questions I hate is, can you find the why? Can you imagine trying to find the why for something that just feels natural? Like, do you need the why for doing karaoke? You just feel it, right?
Yeah.
You just feel it. And for me, one of the things I love about history is trying to piece together in my head an understanding of why things have become the way they are.
Right.
It's like there's a wonderfully mysterious puzzle that is behind everything in human history that provides the answer for why. And even then, we'll never really fully know, because the further you go back in history, the more vague and ambiguous and propagandized and biased reports are. I feel like as we've gotten, only in recent times have we been able to understand how important it is to be very objective.
Right.
And the data that we've compiled has also played a big hand in objectifying and neutralizing, in a way, the data that we analyze. But back then, all of these reports were written by scholars and delegates who were trying to sort of uphold an agenda by a king who wanted to be seen as nothing short of perfect in posterity, right? So
of course,
so it's hard you have to sort of compare documents against each other, and you always have to be aware of the hidden agendas. But I just find it so fascinating to try and have a map in your head is to explain, why we are where we are. And I think it's also necessary, because we can be very easily manipulated into thinking certain things by people who have political interests.
Right.
Unless we understand what the full picture is, what's the reality, or, it's very easy to fall into black and white explanations for things, when actually it's all shades of gray.
And Neil, is an interesting thing too, because even though it comes back to it, when I, like, even for folks like you and I who learn about our favorite artist, going back to the music side of things too, historically speaking, it's that, like, one of the things you'll find out as years go by is, like, well, maybe these people may not be, some folks may not be the heroes they're portrayed to be initially back in their days, right? But then there's other people at the other side of the spectrum where it's like, wow, this guy should have gotten a lot more recognition, because now, after you learn so much more, you dig deep into the layers of their history and all their accomplishments. It's like, wow, this guy's actually a complete genius. Or he or she is just like, they're just like very, very super talented people. Yeah. But it's like the hidden gem.
Oh yeah.
But you don't realize that, man, have we been like following the wrong people this whole time? Sometimes, because I feel like sometimes I get into that side of the spectrum too, where I'm just like, I shouldn't be misjudging these people who I thought, oh, well, they're underrated because they're not that good. But then you realize, no, like, they should be appreciated way more, and
Yeah.
give them where credit's due.
Yeah, I teach music, and sometimes it's difficult to you every now and again you get sort of a kid. It's a difficult situation where a kid, you give them a piece of music to play, they don't like the music, but it's by one of the main celebrated composers, and they say, well, I don't like this, and do I have to play something by this composer? And then you're in a sort of a dilemma, because you don't want to force a kid to play something they don't want to play.
Of course.
But I mean, I remember as a kid also being taught that, well, if you don't like something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not good. It might just mean that you don't understand it yet. Yeah. And that's a hard lesson to teach, and especially in today's world where we've become so focused on the subjective that it's king. It rules over everything else. And so we've lost our ability to put aside our natural whims and our feelings in the face of something that we don't necessarily understand.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult nut to crack.
I feel like that's, to go a little bit deeper. I'm glad, but
postmodernism, isn't it? Really,
well,
it's the deconstruction of hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I feel like, and this is the thing too, because it circles back to even for us, as students growing up, right? Sometimes some of the subject matters that we learn in our classes may not interest us initially. For me, I was just, I was not the brightest 15-year-old in class, right? but then when let's say some of the history stuff that they teach us in social studies, right? Just an example, you learn about what they teach us and all that stuff. I'm just like, okay, whatever, right? I'm just trying to get my grade and that's it, call it a day, right? But then when as I, at least for me, as I got older, then I'm just like, I dig back to what was being taught to me, and I look at it. Let's say 15-year-old me, but then 25-year-old me revisits what was being taught to me, and I would just be like, oh my goodness,
yeah, right.
Like I should have been paying more attention to this.
Was there any particular subject that you had that?
Well, one prime example, like say Canada's early history, right?
Oh, right.
So just. I remember like our socials teacher, if I'm recalling this, if my classmates are hearing this, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just remember him, he was a really solid teacher, actually. He gets you thinking. It's just that for me, I'm just like, okay, interesting, right? I like the fact that he was engaging, but then when I look back at it at an older age, I'm just like, ouch, man, like life is true. Like, life, going back to even the same thing about the classical composers, life back then was not easy, and here I am, this young guy, complaining about whatever. But hey, would you rather not have electricity back then, and potentially freeze to death?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's there's that philosopher, what's his name now, Sam something. Anyway, he runs you through this very useful mental exercise, which is precisely what you just said, which is anytime you think your life's hard, well, just construe in your mind a couple of things that could be much worse. Yeah. And you'll realize actually how well you have it. Mm-hmm, exactly. I think that's a very good exercise to play for. But actually, one other thing you were saying that made me think of something was, and this is for anybody who's listening and who's kind of thinking about the process of learning things in general, is I found that all the years of lessons that I took as a viola player with my Russian teacher in University of Cape Town, and then the subsequent lessons I took from David Harding at UBC, a lot of that knowledge, I just didn't know how to absorb it. And so like you at school with, Canadian history, 10 years later, realizing actually how fascinating it is. Yeah. A lot of the memories that we have, even though we might not be able to access them in the moment, or rather the experience we're having, they still in a way stay with us. And I found that all of the information that was passed to me has just kind of, sometimes it slowly bubbles to the surface, but only after a long period.
That's right.
And it's very easy to get demoralized in the present to think, I don't know how to access this information right now.
That's right.
But if you realize it's a process and it takes a while it's almost like a good wine. It's got to mature, and so I feel like that's an important lesson is, and also a lot of things that seem like a waste of time to us in the moment.
Yeah.
Like you've also pointed out, we come to appreciate them much later on.
And speaking of maturity, I feel like, that's what, at least that's how I see you right now in terms of, going back to with you being a musician, because I feel like, now, like with you, not just advancing your skills, like you've also just advanced your knowledge in general, in life as you go along. But I feel like it does speak through your instrument in a way too. It's like, but right now with you doing, even as something that's so cool, like doing all these different soundtrack pieces, right? It's almost like in a way your biography in some sense, just judging by the songs you've chosen, right? I know there's people who've put on those suggestions out there for you too, right? I think that's great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you're doing things like, like Star Trek, but then you go for something more modern like The Mandalorian, it's just like, now it's like you're paying tribute to the stuff you enjoyed growing up, but then you're also paying tribute to the more modern stuff today. Yeah. And I feel like from and it goes back to what I say, it proves my point that I think you've really grown so much to the point that now what is you as a musician, just judging by the songs you've chosen. And and I mean, I give you so much props. I know you said you're not always a big fan of doing, like, say, mainstream pop music, for example, but when you have done that, even with Sons of Granville, for example, right, you still give it your best when you do that. Especially when you do like such tunes as all the tunes from Daft Punk, right? And
Get Lucky.
Yeah, that one. I almost forgot the title. But you got Get Lucky, but then you also do the more swinging tunes like Moon Dance, for example. Yeah, right? And that's another one that came to mind. But you've displayed that flexibility, and even though if it's not your taste, you still made it work somehow. And I think that still shows, it displays your maturity in a way too. It's like, well, not my taste, but I'm willing to make it work somehow.
Well, I think as musicians, one of the things that makes us musicians is this absolute need that no matter what you're playing, you have to make it as beautiful as you possibly can. Yeah. And I've failed so many times in performances where I've botched up a shift, or perhaps there was a phrase that I should have practiced a bit better, or I just didn't prepare in the correct way for a certain thing, or I'm just having a rough night, but it's never, ever for a lack of trying. Right. I'm always giving everything I can, and I think that's not a compliment to me. That's just, I think, the musician's mentality. We are obsessed with beautiful sounds. Yeah. And so whatever you're playing, you just need it to sound great, and you just don't feel good. You can't live with yourself, and at least you might screw something up, but you've at least given it a real go. Whereas there are other trades where I could imagine you're a carpenter and you're making a table and it's for a client, and you're not particularly fussed about the client or the table, and you just you do whatever and you knock it together. But as a musician, I feel that when you're playing any sort of a piece, it just has to sound really good. There's no such thing as going to even the most mediocre, low-paid gig and not trying to sound like $1 million. No matter how far away from that high quality you might be, there's always this compulsion to want to elevate what you're doing to sound really freaking good.
And speaking of being incredibly good, what do you think the next direction is going to be for Sons of Granville?
Sons of Granville. Well, Sons of Granville has built itself up through a word of mouth reputation. So we work with a number of agents, and we've done some interesting gigs recently. Like, we just came back from Banff. That's right. And we played at the Fairmont, which is a fairly prestigious it's a castle-like hotel. We were actually joking whilst we were in there. We felt we were in the Overlook from The Shining. It was medieval and all these big carpets and everything.
That's right.
But and we did a really nice gig on a yacht that took off from Cole Harbor a few nights before then, and we had a wedding gig in River Powell, or Powell River, sorry.
Yeah.
And so for us it's just I think wherever we go, we make a bit of a splash because we're such a unique combination.
That's right.
Jared Plett is always just getting tons of attention because he's got a shaker on one leg, a tambo on another, and he's got all of these things that he's added to his cajon. So he's just an octopus of percussion.
Yeah.
And Justin just gets into these really sick pockets, Yeah. And he's not one of these guitarists who's trying to do too much. He wants to find the most fundamentally important thing and then sit in it.
Yeah.
And then as an anchor, he frees me up to explore the full range of my instrument and just improvise and it's amazing. The thing that amazes me with Sons of Granville is how we can go from 0 to 100 in terms of energy. We have such a dynamic range, whereas most rock bands tend to be loud,
and that's it.
End song, loud.
Yeah, and that's the whole show. See you guys. Yeah,
exactly. So it's very monochromatic with its dynamics and everything. With Sons of Granville, one of the things I'm proud of is the fact that we do have quite a diverse dynamic range, and not just dynamically, but also the energy behind the music. Like we can play really soft, gentle, dolce or sweet sections, and then we get sort of dark, and then we can get loud and pompous, and then we get funky, and Jarrett is also largely behind that. He's changing the beat, he's changing the groove, he's changing the tempo.
That's right.
And I'm exploring all kinds of crazy sounds of my instruments. So with just 3 instruments, with no loop pedals, with no effect pedals, just the most simple bare bones instrumentation, we go on these very wild, unpredictable musical journeys, and I think people appreciate that. One of the nice things about not having pedals is that all the concentration gets put into the performance rather than the engineering side of things.
That's right.
So the musicianship takes central focus. And I've always thought it's way more interesting to see 2 or 3 guys on a stage with palpable chemistry versus some guys trying to do it all with the loop pedal.
That's right.
Because I like to see people engage.
Yeah.
And with Sons of Granville, there's a real musical dialogue between all of us. We really are speaking to each other.
Yeah.
And I think that's the draw for our particular trio.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's amazing. That's the direction it's going to be heading to. Speaking of musical dialogue, let's talk about the other people that you've collaborated with on your YouTube channel. Yeah. You mentioned Kitty, of course. She's one of your go-tos as well.
I haven't actually collaborated with Kitty on, but we've done lots of videos together.
That's right.
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. And then you also collaborate with a harp player. Is that true?
Yeah, Josephine Lee. Yeah. Every other week we play at the Bayshore Hotel, and we've done lots of gigs together. She's absolutely lovely, and she's a phenomenal harpist. And yes, we've done a couple of videos together. We've got a few more recordings in the bag, which we just need to produce music video wise. Mm-hmm. And we are planning eventually to be a bit more. To do more recordings and videos for sure. Yeah.
And I just find it just so unique to see a harp player and a viola player together, because how often do you say that, right?
Yeah. And one of the things that really works for us there is because she collaborates with lots of people. She's one of the most in-demand harp players in the city. Mm-hmm. So she's just, every week she's playing half a dozen gigs. I think what makes it really work well between us is that we both don't like to use music. So once again, there's a heavy emphasis placed on just playing from memory and improvising.
That's right. Yeah.
And so she likes to play. She's got like probably 100 cover songs memorized.
That's right.
But she's totally okay with me not knowing the song and just making up something else.
Hey, why not?
She's okay with that. So that works for me. And then slowly what happens is I do learn the tunes that she knows.
Right. Yeah. That's awesome. And there's also other piano players that you've collaborated with as well. Correct?
Well, yes. I did collaborate for a while with Elaine Joe.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, we did some great concerts together. The thing that stands out in my mind with Lane was when we did a series of Christmas concerts.
Ah, okay.
Well, we sort of the idea was that people could purchase a 30-minute performance, and so this was in COVID.
Oh, okay.
And so we were doing all of these by Zoom.
Yeah.
But I think in one night we booked something like 12 performances.
Wow, that's
so it was
amazing.
just like playing program after program.
Wow.
By the end of it, my fourth finger was totally buggered.
Oh, I'm sure it must have been. Yeah.
Yeah. We were playing Piazzolla's Oblivion. It was part one of the pieces,
Right.
and it's got all this fourth finger vibratos. And by the time I played it for the 12th time, my hand was just out.
Yeah, you were spent basically. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah, no, that I think that's such a very genius idea during that time, lockdown season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. So
and you and I, of course.
Yeah, of course. Yes, you
we
and
should
I
talk about that because we've got a video coming up.
We do. So the one that's already out, if you guys haven't done so, if you haven't seen it on my Instagram, Thomas and I, we've done a cover of the Chariots of Fire theme song.
That's right.
Which we filmed at the beach back. Was it June or July that we did that? I think it was July that we filmed it.
It was July.
It was July. Yeah, that was the perfect time to do it. Just in time to during the Olympic season when the Olympics in France were happening, or just right after the Olympics.
I think it was just before, actually. Wasn't it just before?
The release of the video.
I see.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I beg your pardon. Yeah.
And I thought, well, yeah, Cheers of Fire, sports, Olympics. That
yeah,
could
I know.
Could get any more perfect than that. But we do have another one coming up. I know this is recording right now on September 18th, Wednesday night, 2024. But later on in this very month of September, we will have our cover version of the NFL theme song for all you football fans out there, because football season is already happening for all you NFL fans. So what better way to launch this cover than during that month when that season is happening right now?
Yeah. It's a very classical interpretation too, because it's just the viola and the piano, and it sounds like it's got a kind of a Russian romantic classical feel to it. Because if you put in the beat, and you add in some other things, it really does. Then suddenly it becomes like, a contemporary piece of pop. But the way we've played it, I mean, I just decided production wise not to throw in the beats and just to let it be those two instruments. And it really takes on a classical feel.
Yeah, that's right. And I think our old buddy Justin from Sons of Granville will definitely appreciate that, because I think he's a football fan himself.
Yeah.
So there you go. Looking forward to the actual release of the video. So make sure you folks, make sure you check it out when we advertise it out there.
That's not this Friday, but next Friday.
That's right. September 27th, it'll be launched. So
yes.
Pretty excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
And and that's part of the soundtrack series, which that's such a genius idea for you to be doing this. I think that was long overdue in my personal opinion, because I know you always strike me as someone who would play all these different soundtracks for familiar shows in general. And the fact that we can do sports soundtracks too, that just takes it to another level.
That was your idea, which I think was great. I never would have thought, because I don't really watch American sports. But it's a great theme, and I know that it really resonates in this part of the world. So
exactly,
it was a great idea.
Exactly. I mean, who knows? Maybe we could take on the Hockey Night in Canada, or maybe if I'm gonna take it a little bit further to, this might give you more of a head shaking kind of, or face palming kind of way, but challenge you to wrestling theme songs one day.
Oh wow, that's really out of my pond.
Oh my god, that's more of my thing. But
I'm into it, man. I'm down.
Yeah. So what's next for you personally as an individual viola player?
Well, I've just submitted a grant application to Creative BC.
Yeah.
So that would be nice if it came through, but ultimately the thing is to try and produce the show for next year for the planetarium.
Awesome.
And so I spent a lot of time recording at Sam Ryan's studio in Ladysmith. He's just a phenomenal audio engineer and a great human being. So it's just been great working with him. And so, the idea would be to produce this album, which would consist of four originals and four covers / medleys. So we make the album quite accessible. Otherwise, it's just original stuff that no one knows. And then to isolate the accompaniments that we produce, so that we can work with them in a live setting. So that's the idea, and it's going to be for Jarrett Plett and myself. So we're hoping to make it a very dramatic, exciting show, and there's going to be this visual component that's being put together by the planetarium.
Awesome.
And it's always just so marvelous to play in the Star Theater with this incredible dome over us. I've now had two shows. In 2018, I actually did 30 minutes of original music that was called Life in the Universe, where we were looking at exoplanets, and they'd sort of found a number of planetary or planet / candidates where life might be found one day once we have more of a capacity to search beyond.
Right.
But so that was a very rewarding concert because the theme was just so stunning and so exciting.
That's fascinating.
And then this year we did the whole May the 4th, the Star Wars theme. So hopefully, so next year looks like they want us to put on a show for Valentine's Day, but they also want us to put on a show for May the 4th. So we'll probably exhibit the program for both of those evenings.
You guys are pretty much the official planetarium house band in a way.
Well, that's one of the main things we discussed when I was talking to the staff there, was that I wanted to have a show kind of like with the AFC, the Artists for Conservation, to have sort of an annual show at the planetarium, each time featuring new film music works that go hand in hand with the science fiction / cosmos theme.
That's amazing. So have you and Jared ever just go back to memory lane and talked about the old days busking on Granville Street? I mean, do you ever often talk about it, and do you guys miss playing on Granville Street sometimes?
We do talk about it. We've got lots of fun memories from that era. I don't think we'd ever want to go back to it. I feel that life changes, and you just find yourself in a different office, different offices of life. And so been there, done that. It was great. It really helped build us to the next level. But it's kind of like in a video game, like you say, you level up.
That's right.
You don't really want to go back to the old level. You want to continue the story and
that's right.
And then go to the next level.
Yeah. And then you will become the final boss after that.
That's the idea. Yeah. So busking is kind of like, step one.
Yeah.
I did it actually once this summer. And I actually made some money, but to be honest, I just felt, I'd much rather, if I'm not busking, I'm either composing or I'm planning the next video or I'm practicing or I'm teaching or I just put my feet up. And I just feel like those activities just get me much more to the next level than anything else.
Amazing. Yeah. And when you're talking about leveling up, maybe if you can give some honest feedback about this, if there was one thing you would want to do to improve the Vancouver music scene, what would you do? Or what do you think Vancouver needs to do to improve the local scene in general?
Well, I think creating performance opportunities for a wide range of musicians who ordinarily wouldn't get it would be something that would be great. And this might seem like a bit of a strange point, but one of the things that always slightly upsets me is when we've got some pretty big shopping malls throughout the city, Metrotown being one of them.
Yeah. Slauson Mills too.
Yeah. And I just feel like, why don't we have a program that pays modest amounts to up and coming musicians to be stationed along the mall?
Yeah.
And you can have an audition, so that I'm not saying that you should just allow anyone who can strum 4 chords on a guitar to try and sell a few CDs or make a few coins, but it's not a busking thing. You actually hire musicians who are training and you take it seriously and they've auditioned to win that spot.
Yeah.
And they get a chance to perform for the public, to develop musically, to get some exposure.
Yeah.
Because when you're busking, when you're playing in the public, you meet people. I've booked so many gigs just by playing out in public.
Yeah.
It's given me confidence to play and to learn. And I just feel like that could be, if there was like a citywide performance program to
Yeah.
elevate musicians by hiring them to play in these big malls instead of this terrible muzak that we hear. We could be supporting local artists.
You hit the nail you hit the nail on the head with that one, in my personal opinion, because I feel like what you and I do, we've been part of the Cami Village live music program every summer,
Right.
for the past
That's a
few
great
years,
program
right?
for that reason. Yeah.
And I feel like, man, can you imagine if the Arts Council, because there's the Burnaby Arts Council, there's the New Westminster Arts Council, where you and I, we've done our gigs out there too, right? I feel like whatever Arts Council, depending where the mall is, the Arts Council should be involved with the mall. To hope you guys are listening to this, by the way. So just so you know, we're proposing the idea to you guys.
Yeah.
Anyways, so I think what the Arts Council should be doing is collaborating with the shopping malls in their district, and say, hey, what if we did a music program where we have all these different musicians, we hire them, give them proper compensation to play at the mall, but then they'll also be allowed to sell some merchandise out there too, in addition to that. And because, well, if they have retail stores, we may as well be our own retail shop too, selling our music somehow, right? Or just like selling our shirts or whatever, Thomas Beckman mugs, whatever you got.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and CDs or download cards or
QR codes to Spotify.
I mean, I actually spoke to Matthew Lennox this morning. Every year or so, we have a chat. He's the original guitarist from Sons of Granville, for those who don't know. But buskers these days, they have these little things where it's like I'm not sure what it's called. It's kind of like a QR code. You simply tap your credit card, and you don't have to get into a PayPal account or anything. It just immediately does a $5 tip.
And that's it.
And it's so easy.
Yeah.
And so you could have that,
Yeah.
And how many times have I walked in a mall past a piano that was just gathering dust?
Yeah, exactly.
And I just don't understand it.
And the thing that drives me insane too is like it's not just a piano; it's just the ones that just plays by itself. Those ones. But I'm thinking
That's
like,
terrible.
well, it would be great, to have, let's say, besides myself as a piano player, but any other piano players in town, create jobs through that avenue. So that way they can actually have somewhere to play and they can flex their muscles out in public that way,
And, I also feel like, kids love seeing live musicians.
They do.
Every time they see a live musician, for them, it's a moment of because they're not just seeing and hearing this great music, but they're seeing somebody do something that they're not used to seeing yet, which is the genuine, pure expression through an instrument.
That's right.
And kids are just a light bulb goes on.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I feel like it would make shopping malls so much more educational and inspiring for the young kids, because there's just always, I don't know what percentage of kids occupy the shoppers at malls, but it's got to be a hefty fraction. So all those kids could be turned on to music, and they'd put away the iPad for 10 seconds at least.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm going to give credit where credit's due. I want to a big shout out to the School of Rock in Vancouver, actually, because what they did was that they actually utilized the mall last year to showcase their students playing as a band in front of the people out there in the mall, right? Yeah. And when I saw that last year, I was just like, huh. There should be something like this more often.
Absolutely.
More often than you think, because I feel like the mall is also the perfect opportunity as an event space. And that's just me, but I always like to see, what could this be for musicians? Every time when I go into a space that I think has a lot of potential, first thing comes to mind, could this be good for musicians to use? Yeah.
I mean, you could probably take a tiny sliver of the profits from all of the rents or everything. I mean, at the tiniest of fractions of all the revenue that's generated in those malls now would just so easily cover an entire comprehensive program.
I remember what you were mentioning about it too when you mentioned Metrotown. I think they dabbled that idea for a little bit a couple of years ago. Yeah, a little bit. Because I did remember that area where the store Claire's is, and you're heading towards the, you're almost heading towards the food court area.
Oh yeah.
But so it's right by Claire's. upstairs. But I remember there's this one little spot where I did see a guy playing his keyboard actually, right? And I was just like, oh, well, this is interesting, right? And I saw a little bit of that, and I think that was just a little experiment that someone tried. I don't know how the response was. Personally, I liked the idea. When I saw that, I was just like, "Oh, that's really cool."
Yeah.
I saw somebody else sang at the mall. Who was it? Angie Faith. She's a singer. A singer friend of ours, and she sang at a mall as well. And I think I would love to hear her side to see how that experience was. But when anytime I see something like that happen at these public places, I'm like, I bet you these are like trial runs, but I really feel like this has a lot of potential.
Yeah. I think the malls would do really well by it too, because all of these live acts would attract people.
Yeah.
And the artists themselves would they would advertise themselves playing in the mall. So the artists would attract people, but also just people seeing the musicians playing there.
Yeah.
It would be so much more of a fun and engaging experience for them. Their kids, that they'd probably be more inclined to go back more often. It wouldn't just be a mindless shopping experience. It would be a cultural experience.
And it's entertaining at the same time.
Yeah. And you could get really clever about who you're bringing into those spaces. Like I don't think it should be a free for all. It should be really a very we want to represent all these different types of music.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there still should be some curators who are qualified to know who's a good fit for that kind of concept.
Yeah. So it becomes a really thoughtful cultural experience.
Yeah. Have you thought about curating a festival yourself?
No, that's a lot of work. Yeah, no, I love the whole recording shtick. I can spend a day or two in the studio just working nonstop. I'm happy as a clown. So that's where I want to be. But I'd like to get a bit more into the whole live music with backing tracks, but really rich, beautifully constructed accompaniments, and then have enough of a live element. I really believe in there being more than just one person on the stage.
Yeah.
You need musical chemistry. And so for me, I think first starting off with Jarrett would be good, but as you've mentioned, I've got a really solid group of musical collaborators like yourself, and there's Kitty, and there's Josephine, there's Justin, and there's some others. And so it would be great to have the project expand to the point where I could bring you guys all onto the stage. But that's where the work lies.
Speaking of the crew, so we have people that do listen to this program who are still brand new to the music scene in Vancouver. If you could give any kind of words of wisdom of advice, what would it be?
To what, emerging artists?
Yeah, just anyone who just wants to get themselves out there in the local scene.
Well, for me, that way, as we've discussed, was busking. You got nothing to lose. Couple of points. If you are going to go out there and you're going to busk, some great spots. The boardwalk along Cole Harbour is a great place because it's not quite as noisy, although there are the damn seaplanes and they're always taking off and landing. So there's that. So depending on where you situate yourself, but there are some great spots, a lot of wealthy tourists. People are taking their time. I also used to busk a lot at Broadway and Canby.
That's right.
And I found that I made quite a lot of money there. But I just feel like the important thing is just to make sure that you're practicing and that you're finding performance opportunities. Don't get yourself locked up and away and think, well, I'll play once I'm ready. Right. That's a thing, a very common pitfalls. You're never really going to be 100% ready. I've given some of the most atrocious shows in my life. Yeah. And when I think about them, it hurts. But I've also given some great shows. And I would have never have given the great shows without it first really sucking. So, and I think it's the same for comedians, the same for anybody who's in the performing arts. You just got to go out there and do it. Yeah. You just got to do it. You got to go out there, you got to fail hard, and you got to fail consistently. And you'll have your little victories. And then as time goes on, kind of like the stock exchange, you'll notice that it goes up and up and up. Yeah.
Exactly. And as we talked about, going back to full circle again, if you're like a video game character, you're just going to level up as soon as you try every time.
Yeah. Don't take things personally. Just every failure that that comes along is a learning experience. So collect the failures and learn from them actively.
Yeah, exactly. And it's great that you put that out there for everyone. So we really appreciate you doing that. And I think it's just so important to talk about this kind of stuff because, with you and I, being, especially with you being a local legend here already in the music scene, it's
local legend.
Yeah. Wow. In my eyes, in my federation, I'll just straight up.
Deeply honored. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. But it's just the fact that, with me, because I've been going back to the open mics again within the last couple of years now, and I've been seeing an explosion of a new roster of talent, and I'm just like, wow, there's these new people here, these new season characters,
Nice.
new season cast of characters that have popped into the scene at the open mic circle, and they got so much to offer, and that's why I feel like it's really important that for long timers like you and I, if they do seek some sort of guidance, we can be there for them in any way we can. And I think you've done a great job, even with yourself being a music teacher already too. And I think you're passing on skills to a new generation, and I think that deserves a lot of props.
No, thanks, Ed.
Yeah, of course. So just want to wrap up. So again, first of all, thank you again for coming down here. I'm actually glad we had so much deep discussions too, just in general.
Yeah.
But to wrap up here, how can people find you on the internet?
Well, I have my website, which is thomasbeckman.org. Or you can find me on Spotify just by my name, Thomas Beckman, Beckman. And then there's my YouTube channel, which is the same thing. So if you just type in my name, you'll find that I'm on Spotify, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, all the main stuff. And then there's my website, thomasbeckman.org. So yeah, those are the ways that you can find me. And the series that I'm building right now, the Viola Lick series, I think this Friday is the video number 36. So they're going to be 52 installments. So that's going to take us to the beginning of next year, January. So every Friday at 10 a.m., there's a new music video. Yeah. And this Friday is an Egyptian piece, and the week following that is our collaboration, the NFL theme.
That's right. So every Friday, you will be entertained to new content to start off your day, to kick off your weekend. So there you go. Thank you so much, Thomas, for being on the show today.
Yeah.
So with that being said, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time. We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Eddie Lam Show, a podcast dedicated to interviewing musicians and online content creators of every kind. If you would like to be a guest on the program, feel free to send me an email at eddielammusic@gmail.com. That's eddielammusic@gmail.com. Don't forget to check out my website at eddielammusic.ca. That's eddielammusic.ca. You can also follow me on social media. Username is Eddie Lam Music. That's eddielam music on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Thank you so much for tuning into our program. In the meantime, stay in touch, stay safe, and as always, stay awesome.